Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third and final day of what I think we can all agree has been a very inspiring and insightful community engagement symposium. And just to reflect on the last few days, on Tuesday, the focus or the theme for the day was engaged citizenry and community university partnerships. And yesterday we focused on engaged teaching and learning and engaged research. And the theme for today is social innovation and social entrepreneurship. So I'll quickly just run through the program. So this morning we'll have two keynote addresses, and the first keynote address will be by Dr. Marisol Morales, and the second keynote will be by Prof. George Opunduru. So after Dr. Morales' keynote address, we'll have the breakaway sessions. We'll have tea after that, then we come back into this main venue for the keynote by Prof. Opunduru. And then after that, we'll have a roundtable discussion facilitated by my colleague Anna Talbot on engaged citizens, and she'll also include students and giving their reflections around their experiences on engaged citizenry. Then after that, we'll also have a breakaway again. We'll have presentations in this venue, but we'll also have poster presentations at the same time. So if we can also, I don't want to say move between the two, but bear in mind that there will be presentations here, but we'll also have presentations outside. And then in venue B, after the presentation here, we'll have presentations in venue B. And also just to note, there'll be another CE conference in June from the 28th to the 30th of June, and it will be hosted by our colleagues from University of Zululand, Mangosuthu University of Technology, as well as University of Venda and Mamusa. And there's Mamusa and Prof. Mandleni if you want to get further information. So Mamusa is from University of Zululand, and Prof. Mandleni, I saw somewhere. Yes, is from Mangosuthu University of Technology. And the theme for that conference will be, We Are Because You Are, Community Engagement and the Scholarship of Engagement Interface. So I think they're also looking forward to seeing all of us there. Quite a few of us have already submitted our abstracts. So I think that will be the next event for all of us to get together.
So we have made the consideration of them for next month for this school and 1 hour, so that they can also be able to discuss with them.
Thank you. So maybe during tea you can have discussions with Dr. Lekoa or Prof. Mandoni. And then we'll end off the day with Dr. Mangi Maistri, just a consolidation in the end. I'll now hand over to Bertha, who will introduce Dr. Morales.
It is my pleasure this morning to officially introduce Dr. Marisol Morales. We've been engaging with her, but this is your official introduction. Marisol Morales is the Executive Director of the Carnegie Elective Classification, providing conceptual leadership, operational oversight to the elective classifications work. This includes the collaborative development of and responsibility of all initiatives, oversight and facilitation of relevant national and international advisory committees, conceptualizing and implementing extensive data archives, as well as developing and enacting shared vision regarding access to and use of the knowledge produced by the Carnegie Elective Classifications to beneficially guide research, policy, and practice. Prior to this role, she was the Vice President for Network Leadership at Campus Compact from 2018 to 2022. Morales was the founding director of the Office of Civic and Community Engagement at the University of Lavin from 2023 to 2018, and the Associate Director of the STEAMS Center of community-based service learning and community service studies at DePaul University from 2005 to 2013. In 2020, she was appointed as a visiting assistant prof of community engaged scholarship at the University of Central Florida. And also serves as an adjunct faculty in the Endless Higher Education Master's Program at Northeastern Illinois University. Molaris sits on the editorial board of Liberal Education, a publication of the Association of American Colleges and Universities, and on the board of the International Association for Research on Service Learning and Community Engagement. Morales holds a BA in Latin American Studies and a Master's in International Public Service Management, both from DePaul University. She earned her a Doctor of Education in Organizational Leadership at the University of Laverne in 2020. Her dissertation focused on the community engagement experiences of Latinx students at a Hispanic serving institution. She's going to be presenting to us on the Carnegie Foundation's Elective Classification for Community Engagement, Forging an African Perspective. It's your time.
Morning, folks. Good morning. So my hope is to present for about 30 minutes and then engage in conversation. So I've got a timekeeper, and we'll see how that goes. Some of you were here the other day when I gave the workshop, so we'll be covering some of the material there, but sharing some new work. So let's see how it goes. All right. So just some things to, and I'm going to be moving. So, just some things to, some questions to ground us as we begin. So thinking about your own institutions, right, and the South African context, what are the values, circumstances, beliefs, philosophies that drive community engagement work in your context? What do you do, and how do you know that you do it well? And how is the community voice included and centered in your community engagement work? Just some background. So the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching in the 1970s built this sort of landscape analysis of U.S. higher education. And this was really meant to sort of distinguish and understand and categorize the types of different higher ed institutions that we have in the United States. This developed in the 1970s, and it was never meant to be anything used for rankings or hierarchy. It was just meant to be a landscape analysis. But over the years, it's transformed and used in many of the rankings that we see. In 2005, the community engagement elective was created. And really this was the universal elective, which was in the 1970s, was assigned to all institutions of higher education in the United States based on publicly available data. The elective came out in 2005 with a call to action that was happening on behalf of presidents representing different institutions of higher education and thinking about what they could do to reconnect with higher education's public purpose. The elective classification is just that. The institutions elect to do this classification. It's not something that's automatically assigned. And really it's meant to complement the universal or the basic elective. Currently, we're housed at the American Council on Education, and this is sort of what the classifications look like. On the universal side, there's the basic classification. Again, that's sort of categorization of all institutions of higher education. And then we are in the process of developing a social and economic mobility classification that will apply to all institutions of higher ed, again, based on publicly available data. On the electives classification, we have community engagement. Last year, we launched Leadership for Public Purpose, and we do that in partnership with Rice University. And then we're in the process of doing feasibility studies around sustainability, indigenous serving, military connected, and justice impacted students. The community engagement elective classification is the only one of the electives that operates also outside of the United States. This is just a little bit of the timeline in terms of sort of thinking about the community engagement movement in higher education in the United States, the call to action in the early 2000s, the pilot beginning in 2005 of the community engagement elective, and then the official launch happening in 2006. And again, as you see, there was a long period of time when it was just the community engagement elective. And what I want to highlight here was really the field in the United States that held that together. I often say that for many years, the community engagement classification was held together by duct tape and bubble gum, because it was really the leaders in the field who held it together, who saw the value of this work, especially as leadership at the foundation had changed and wasn't as focused on higher education. And so now there's new and renewed energy around the classification and the Carnegie Foundation's connection to higher education. And so that's why you see this proliferation of electives happening now. And our new host, which is the organization I work for, which is the American Council on Education. And these are our badges. And so once a campus is classified, this is the badge that they get to use that identifies them as a classified campus. And as you see, we have Australia and Canada as well. And I want to share a little video with you that our Australian colleagues put together that shows sort of how they've thought about and used the classification as they're kicking off. Can you start from the beginning and then put the volume? And maximize it too. Thank you. And so that's just a little video. I just got it and I was really excited to share it with you because as we've sort of developed these relationships with each country and they've thought about the ways to utilize the classification to build deeper connections, to build communities of practice and to enhance and utilize the framework in order to speak to the context of their nation and the ways that they want to engage and develop community engagement. So really, what does the classification do? Or what is it? It provides an independent and rigorous assessment of an institution's extraordinary commitment to, investment in, and accomplishment of an important public purpose aspect. And so for us, while the community engagement elective is the one that's been around the longest, the foundation really sees the electives as an umbrella around public purpose. And so that's why we're in the process of developing additional electives that fall under that public purpose theme. But it is this accomplishment of, right, investment in and commitment to, in this case, community engagement. One of the things that has been central to the Carnegie Community Engagement Elective Classification has been the definition of engagement. And so what it gave us was an opportunity to have shared language around community engagement and then assess the self-studies that institutions provide through this lens and through this definition. So I'm going to give you a minute to read this definition and just tell me what stands out to you. Anybody?
Collaboration.
Collaboration? Great. What else? Yeah.
I think it contains a language that we use in South Africa to explain or to describe or to understand community engagement. Because there's collaboration between institutions and the large communities. And all of us talk about mutual beneficial relationships. And we talk about reciprocity, we talk about partnership. So it has all of those words in this definition of community engagement.
Yeah. So you can see yourselves in there, the language that you already use. Anything else?
The exchange between the partners.
Right, that exchange. Yeah, absolutely. And there's two parts to this definition. One is the process of engagement, and the second, which I'll share with you now, is the purpose of engagement. And I'll give you a second to read that. So. So what stands out to you about this? Yeah.
I think it contains the elements of that process that will be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
So there's content linking into the core business of the institutions and the partners in terms of moving it forward.
What I like about it is that it underpins the democratic values and civic responsibility. It also aligns with what we have in the white paper, focusing on social responsibility.
Right, great. Others? Yeah.
What I'm missing, but what is specific to our country, is the idea of redress and social justice.
Right. That's a great point. Anybody else? Sure.
I thought I wanted as well, but they were taking a difficult addressing physical social issues that kind of fall into the challenges of our it's there, but it's not explicit as we were wanting.
Right. So it could fall there within the critical societal issues, but it is not as specific as you may want to. Yeah.
And I think the inclusivity of the three pillars of IA
Yeah, the pillars of higher education, right? And so, you know, the development of this definition was, how do you make it specific enough yet broad enough to encompass what we do within higher education? Because this is what we essentially use as sort of our assessment tool when we review and assess the applications that are submitted, right? So it's against this definition. And those critical societal issues will vary from community to community, even in the same country. And so again, it's still broad enough, but specific enough to encompass kind of how we've done and how community engagement work has developed. And this has been key. And so one of the things that the foundation is very committed to is keeping this definition across the different electives, whether it's in the United States, Australia, and Canada. Where we're coming into some interesting conversations are those countries who are interested in the classification but are not democracies. And so how do we engage in this conversation, right? So yet to see, and especially also when a time when the American democracy is being challenged, right? And in many ways, this is more important now than ever, given what's happening actually globally around democracy. And how do we think about the sort of dimensions of engagement within the context of the application, right? So these sort of 4 areas: the civic mission of higher education, improved teaching and learning, connecting to the community, and the new production of knowledge. And so all of these are reflected in the application itself. While I can't go through all of the questions, I'll provide you with sort of an overview of the different sections and some of the kind of overarching questions that are asked within the application. And again, this is an institutional self-study. Institutions provide the information. There's a set of questions that have been developed that align with sort of what we know about best practices, and really seeks to then have institutions think about what they do, how they do it, and if they don't do it, provide opportunities to engage in that reflection to think about bettering their practice. So what are some of the guiding principles and criteria? Well, we wanted to reflect deep manifestations of commitment to public purpose at the institutional level. This is an institutional recognition. It's not for a program or a college or office. It is for the institution. And so the questions that are embedded in the application looks at the institution. So we ask that you bring together disparate parts of the institution to really engage in this process. It has to be connected to also the core academic mission of the institution, and that's really key. We want it to be a field force in the direction of continuous improvement and people-centered systems change. And so we want balanced rigor in this. We want to push without pulling, and we want this to be a tool that institutions can use to really align their practice. It's rooted in a clear definition, as I shared, and it has to be seated within an existing higher education field. You know, in the case of Australia, they already had an organization called Engagement Australia where they began this process. And the Carnegie work then becomes an offshoot of Engagement Australia. In Canada, they don't have such an organization, but they have a group of committed folks who've been working together over a number of years to develop and launch the application there. And while they have 5 institutions now that are going to take up fiscal responsibility over the next 2 years, their plan is to create a national higher education community engagement organization based on the Carnegie work that they're doing. I shared a little bit about this already, so I won't take too much time. But, you know, thinking about this as a way for campuses to claim this as part of their institutional identity, honoring institutional achievement while also promoting ongoing improvement, and having campuses engage in the process of inquiry, reflection, and self-assessment. And it is also designed to represent and respect the diversity of institutions and their varying approaches to community engagement. And so whenever we do pilots, we like to have a variety of different institution types that are located in that country, right? So if you have 2-year colleges, if you have research institutions, the variety that you have, we like to see that represented in the pilot so that we make sure that it is accessible to all types of institutions and not just those that are resourced. So currently in the United States, we have 352 campuses that hold the classifications, and they're about evenly mixed between public and private. And this is across the country and in our territory / my home colony, Puerto Rico. And this is a little bit of the breakdown. We only have 16 community colleges, so as we did our own sort of data analysis, We have identified community colleges as a target area that we're going to do specific capacity building and outreach to, as well as our different minority serving institutions. Again, another target area for us, and then see the breakdown between public and private. Because we've been doing this for so long, we actually have a number of institutions that are up to do this for the third time, so second reclass. Campuses typically will hold the classification, we've changed it, but for 6 years. And if they are interested at the 6-year mark, they go up for reclassification. And they're able to speak to the work that they've done since the last application and then reapply. So we have a number of campuses, again, that are doing this for the third time. So we're really excited to learn about what does that long-term institutional commitment to this look like, especially after multiple cycles. And in the United States, we offer or we open the application every 2 years. This year, because of COVID, campuses that classified in 2015 had the option to classify in either 2024 or 2026. We know the majority are going to reclassify in 2026. So this round we had about 60 apply. The next round, for 2026, we're expecting 350 campuses to apply. And we've changed the review process, so it's now a tiered peer review process. So there's teams of 3 that review 7 to 10 applications. If they don't come to consensus, it goes to senior review committee, and then the staff reviews all of them. We've also made a commitment to have folks representing different types of higher education institutions on the review team. So if a community college is going to get reviewed, there's someone on that team that has worked at or been connected to a community college. We found that the lack of representation also impacted quite a bit the attainment rate. And this is the attainment rate from the last cycle in the United States, 61%. So that indicates that it's hard, but it's doable. And we provide quite a bit of capacity building for institutions who are applying. The classification serves as a benchmarking tool. It's not meant to be a hierarchy. It's mainly descriptive. It's very narrative based. It's self-reported data and information. And institutions evaluate various aspects of the process in relationship to best practice. And this is what we call the documentation framework. It gives a space for campuses to tell their story and their unique approach to community engagement. The first part of the application is really the context setting. So you tell us in the application where your institution is located, what kind of students it serves, what community it partners with, what are the main values and philosophies. What is your definition of community engagement? Is it the Carnegie definition or is it something else? You can speak to that, right? You can speak to the philosophy of engagement that you have at your institution. It allows you to really share that. And as we're collecting this information from different kinds of institutions, there's a ton of data that we have about what higher education community engagement looks like. So how do we review this? I talked a little bit about our peer review process, but it's a holistic review. There's not one part that makes or breaks the application. The evidence is considered as full, but we do need to see evidence of what a campus has done, not just what they aspire to do. There's a set of foundational indicators. I'll share some of those questions with you shortly. That give you a clear indication about sort of where you're at, maybe opportunities for enhanced thinking or collective action. It has to provide or have a coherent institutional narrative. I know this wouldn't happen here, but at least in the States, many institutions have their marketing departments writing their applications. We know the difference, right? It is practitioners who are reviewing this. Your marketing department will tell you that your institution is great and that there are no mistakes in community engagement. Practitioners will tell you different, that oftentimes the best learning we do are from the mistakes that we make and the apologies that we have to offer, right? And so thinking about what a coherent institutional narrative would be. There has to be alignment in the application. The different sort of sections need to make sense. You can't contradict. And thinking about the implementation, again, for work that your institution has done, not just what it aspires to do. And really, I think the key for the classification is this idea of institutional transformation. And how do we do the work to institutionalize this and support our community partners in the process? And so what I like to say is we do this as people-centered systems change, where it's people-centered and transformation focused. And we look at the people at the center, we want to look at our practices, our policies, and our partnerships. Great. I'm going to run through the rest quickly because I also want to have time to have conversation. Again, what we're really committed to is making this of and by the field. And so being as connected to the practitioners as possible, inviting them into the process, especially as we develop the questions, we do the review process. We want it to be driven by equity and collective action. We seek to increase participation, transparency, and field learning through this process. Again, that balanced rigor, pushing without pulling folks along, and then understanding and using the data to enhance practice and to do our work better. I shared this before, but when we looked at sort of what does transformational change look like, we know that many institutions might exist within the sort of high depth, low pervasiveness, right? And are getting to, but most of the ones that achieve the classification are in this sort of number 3 category, right? The far-reaching change. But the application itself is geared towards moving towards transformational change, that 4th quadrant. And so as we sort of change and develop the application from cycle to cycle, we think about what are the trends in the field and how are we moving the application along to be responsive to the moment. So an example of that is this current application, we included a question about COVID and how campuses responded to COVID, how they responded to the racial justice movement in the United States, the climate change movement, and what else? The decreasing trust in democracy, right? So there's a section now that really speaks to current events and how they've impacted our campuses. We've also moved the application along to ask for disaggregated demographic data, because what we know, at least in the case of the United States, it's more women and people of color who are doing community engagement work. And if this is not recognized in the tenure and promotion process, then it is an issue of equity if their work is not being, if this is the kind of work they're doing and it's not being validated within the institution. And so thinking about the ways as you all contemplate the development of a Carnegie Community Engagement Elective in South Africa, what are the kinds of questions you would like to ask? What are ones that deal with the sort of current situation and context of South Africa? And how do you want to use this as a tool for understanding the work that you're doing, validating the work that you're doing, and moving this towards sort of usefulness within your educational setting that helps drive funding, support the work, and increase improvement with our community partnerships. We'll wait while this comes up, but there's a number of different reasons why institutions do this. And I often say that the process is the prize. And while your presidents and chancellors might want that Carnegie designation, right, and put it on their website, we know that really what the benefit is that institutional self-study. Oftentimes it takes a year to year and a half for an institution to engage in this. They build together a team. They think about the ways that community engagement is happening, at the institutional investment level, and the resources that are going out to the community, the economic impact that our institutions are having in community, the kinds of classes we're offering, the co-curricular options that we're offering. We also know that tenure and promotion is important. So that's another aspect of the application. And I think actually that question and its appearance in the classification over the years has really moved many institutions, from high research institutions to community colleges, to think about the way that their reward system, and if they say they're about community engagement, how are they demonstrating that through their reward system? Again, it serves as an institutional self-assessment and self-study. It offers an accountability measure, and it serves as a catalyst for change, right? So you can sort of think about fostering institutional alignment with public purpose teaching, learning, and scholarship. What we hear from folks in the field is that the classification is one of the highest forms of recognition possible in the field. If you're at all interested in the process of self-assessment and quality improvement, applying for the Carnegie Classification is a fine way to achieve that goal. And this opportunity allowed us to lift up elements of our institutional mission and distinctiveness that are not necessarily represented in the national data on colleges and universities. It also helped us to prepare for both reaccreditation and our current strategic plan. So we don't want campuses to see this outside of their ongoing strategic plans or accreditation processes. How can you use it to serve that purpose as well? And I'm going to open the floor up for questions while this comes up, because I do want to share these next slides. So based on what you've heard so far, what questions do you have? Yeah.
This is perhaps more a question to die. So I like the fact that we attempted a conversation around under implementing or reflecting on this framework. I really think it's good. It's much better than Town's higher education models for social impact, etc. But my question relates to this evaluative framework in relation to a scholarship of engagement, and whether this framework will allow a reflection and a guidance towards the development of a scholarship. And perhaps it is open-ended, and I wonder if you would mind to reflect on it. Because my sense is that we are moving towards a scholarly thinking around the practice of community engagement. This, of course, helps institutions to focus, align, evaluate, make sense of, better embed the idea of engagement, etc. But I wonder if the two can link, and to what extent it can link within the South African context, where indeed the idea of equity, redress, restitution is key in the journey of transformation. But I'm throwing this one to you, perhaps not to answer now, but I wonder if it can link and whether this will enable a conversation of scholarship.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is a section that asks for scholarship and publication for faculty around engagement work. So there's a way to document that in there. So because the question is there, it allows folks to ask that question on their campus. Who's doing this? What community engagement work are you publishing on? And those are captured. You can capture them in the application. I want to highlight this piece because there's a difference between community engaged and community based. And what this application looks at is community engaged. And so it's great that, work is happening in the community, but if it's not from a community engagement perspective, where it's asset-based, where campus and community partners are sharing power and decision making, where the knowledge of the community is validated, then that would not be necessarily something that you include in this application, right? Versus something that happens sort of just in the community. And so we ask campuses, like, cast the net wide to get all of the stories that you have, whether they're community-based or community-engaged, but assess them and include them in the application if they're community-engaged, if they align with that definition. The other stuff you can send to marketing. And really, we look for this to be a paradigm shift, right? So how do we move from hours to impact, from individuals to teams, observations to outcomes, deficits to assets, reflection to action, discipline expert to community of co-educators, and personal good to public good? That's what we're seeking to do with engagement work in general, and I think the application helps to move us in that direction. And then let me just share how the application, again, is broken up. There's 14 sections. The first section of which is really about context and partnership. And what we try to do in this is really center community partnerships as key and central to this application. And so we ask campuses to talk about their campus, community, and community engagement context, the quality of community engagement relationships, and also what those academic community campus partnerships are, and the examples of those. Then there's a piece around the institutional infrastructure. What's the institutional identity and culture? What's the infrastructure and finance for this work? And whether or not there's campus-wide tracking, monitoring, and assessment tools, and sort of providing outcomes and impact in them. And then, we moved to the assessment portion of it, and then looking at the academic core, faculty and staff. And again, this is a space, particularly in the faculty and staff, where we talk about faculty and staff scholarship and contribution to the field. So this speaks to that scholarship and engagement question that you asked for, where it shows up in the curricular as well as co-curricular aspects. And then in our case, we asked for sort of, are there pathways for student development and learning through community engagement? So these would look at like sort of leadership programs, scaffolded opportunities, and then sort of other community engagement initiatives. And we asked for a reflection on what this process was like for each institution. This gives us an opportunity to learn, but there's a lot of rich data there in terms of like, this was really supported on my campus, or I really struggled in trying to pull together a team. This is where we, saw that we had gaps, right? So again, that reflection piece is key. The other piece that we've implemented since the last cycle is a community partnership survey that gets sent out to community partners that the institution identifies. And so that's that external validation from your community partners that is then part of this, right? So you can tell us what you do. The community partner gets a survey and is able then to either validate or not, right, what you say that you do. In the U.S., we have the survey available in both English and Spanish. And so I've got a set of questions here that really just kind of, we do this as an exercise with campuses, but it helps give you a sense of kind of what the application asks for, right? So thinking about your own campuses, my team campus has an institutionally sanctioned definition of community engagement and related terms, right? Is that something that currently exists? Maybe that's something that your institution needs to move forward. My team campus has 5 to 8 representative examples of partnerships that represent both depth and breadth of engagement. Our campus mission and vision reflects an institutional commitment to community engagement. Our campus has budgetary allocations dedicated to supporting institutional engagement with the community. Our campus has an institution-wide system to track, report engagement in the community. Then I have another set of questions. Again, these are sort of some of the overarching questions for each of the sections. But that helps you think, and usually when I do this as an activity, I do a red light, green light, yellow light, and have folks sort of move across the room to where they think their campus is at. And that gives them some sort of indicators about, oh, maybe we need to ask more questions on our campus. Again, it's a way to collect the data, a way to do institutional self-assessment. And if you're thinking about it sort of nationwide, how do you use this data then to improve practice? And so again, in Australia and Canada, they've developed communities of practice out of this, and they've really sought to use this as a tool to also approach government. In Australia currently, they have a new party, and there's a higher education accord. And so they're utilizing the classification as an opportunity to push for more funding around this, and something that validates the work that these institutions are doing around community engagement. So I will leave it at that. You'll get copies of this PowerPoint. There's more questions in there. I also have my contact information. I'll just sort of skip to that. But I really just want to spend the rest of the time, I don't know how much we have, just answering any questions or thoughts and concerns that you might have. I think we're going to be asking it today. I really had fun. Questions, thoughts, reflections?
Somebody in the video said something around inviting people to either be part of the COP or accreditation. Can you tell us what they meant?
Yes. So the COP. So in Australia, they developed. So the way the process works is if a country indicates that they're interested, then we go through sort of what is the pilot process. So there's an official letter that somebody would send that, we're interested in South Africa, we're interested in, pursuing the Carnegie Community Engagement Elective. Then we would ask for a set of institutions to be identified to do the pilot. They would sort of use the American application, adjust it for language and certain other things, and then go through sort of a year-long process of that. And then take from those learnings and then write the application to make the decision whether or not they want to sort of go full force, and the foundation would have to approve as well. And then they would open up the process for all campuses. In Australia, what they did was that they did the pilot process and the community of practice project. So they sought this to be an opportunity for them to learn about how engagement was working on different campuses, bring in resources, and the accreditation she's talking about is really the classification. It's not sort of a separate accreditation process. Australia, like in Australia, their sort of business model was they charge campuses, I think, $7,000 to be part of the pilot process, and that included then access and participation in. And some campuses that couldn't, afford to sort of do that were still able to participate in the community of practice. But each country also determines its own business model for this. In the States, we charge an application fee for campuses that's rather nominal. It ranges from $350 to $1,200, depending on the size of the campus and their expenditures per student. That is basically enough to pay the reviewers, and we fundraise the rest of our money for staffing. Any other questions? Yeah.
You have any requests from schools, from regional schools, like high schools, to join, or is it not open to that at all?
Yeah, it's just higher ed.
So your community of practice is sort of the pilot anyway, aren't they one and the same thing?
No, because all pilots can be part of the community of practice, but not all community of practice participants can be part of the pilot. That's the decision that they make because of the fee that's associated with it. It could be that case. I would probably recommend a small group to start with, and then sort of moving out from there, a small representative group.
Okay, so we in this country, we could start a community of practice just to see who was keen. Let's start the process before we engage with you, and we'll have questions, etc., etc. And then in a more formal way, we can move to a pilot if that's a decision we make.
Yeah, or you can do it simultaneously.
And so for our peculiarities, like we would want a little bit more around, social justice, etc., we can put that in the criteria or not. We can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
yeah. So, I think one of the things that Australia decided to do was add a question around like co-publication between community partners and faculty. That's something that we don't currently have in the American one, but we're definitely interested in putting in. And so they included that. Or both Australia and Canada had much more intentionality around Indigenous communities. So that's something that is very apparent in their application that's not in the US, where ours asks for that disaggregated demographic data and sort of the sort of broader issues that are impacting the state. So we would work with you to sort of develop those questions. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. And thanks for your presentation. What seems to be lacking in South Africa, at least something which was there in Africa, is the will to the people. And hence we have also got things happening, for example, corruption, all that. How can we use community engagement to bring that will to the people? Secondly, Professor Ektes, in her presentation, highlighted something very important, that we think of the community as them there. And some of these have been making reference to, if you stand at the monument here at the, I hope you in, if not, so that I could take you there, and then you look across a contact. You know, the disparities and contrast are visible even to a blind person. Now, I'm interested to know, in your context back home, how do you view a community?
Sure. So that's really left up to the institutions to define how they sort of see community. I will go back to the definition because it speaks a little bit to that. So in this case, it kind of speaks to locale, but it could be sort of broad enough, broadened. You know, and I am one too. So like community colleges would answer this differently because many of their students come from the local community. Many of their activities are happening on campus, so there's not this sort of separation between campus and community. Bless you. I think our campuses are going to have to answer that more, especially as there's more representation happening from diverse students. But each campus answers that for themselves within the question at the beginning about context, right? So you in that section will define what your community is. Again, this is meant to respect the diversity of the way institutions do community engagement and the diversity of the communities that they're partnered with. You know, to the broader question of sort of corruption and I wish I had a magic wand to take away all the bad people. But I think that part of what this work does and what this inspires us to do is think about what are the ethics of engagement. Like if we put students in these positions and they're seeing the impact of the policies, they're seeing it impacted on them, they're seeing it impacted on the communities that they're part of and they're working with. You know, hopefully those will be the motivations that keep them committed to the ethics of community, the ethics of responsibility, and against corruption. But you know, that's a broader sort of conversation that needs to happen. And the way accountability, you know, shows up. So if in South Africa the issue of activism, you know, is an important part, and advocacy is an important part of the way engagement happens, then how do you include that to speak to some of those pieces?
My question is on the paradigm shift. How do you move from reflection to action on the people in the context of evaluation? What's the leadership?
Yeah, so I think if, you know, in an individual class context, it's the way the faculty sets up the project, right? Do you help students see this not as just a service or a sense of responsibility and agency, right? So I think about it along the lines of awareness, agency, and action, and helping students walk through that process. So awareness of the issue, right, and why it's happening. They might understand it because they're impacted by it, but they might not know the history of why, right? And so in this classroom space, in this community space, we help them understand the issues of why. We also help them to find their own agency, right? You actually can do something about this. Here are different opportunities to do something about this, right? This sort of issues to action. What are the issues? How do we hear from the community and how do we move those towards identifying who the power players are and sort of moving that action forward? And then finally, that action piece. How do our classes and the work that we do provide avenues for students to see themselves and be in spaces to really create change, as well as our community partners, right? And thinking about that, I don't have to do this in isolation. Actually, if we do this together, we have more power to change and hold these institutions accountable. So I think that that's the piece for just reflecting on it, right? Because oftentimes, at least the way sort of service learning was set up in the United States, you do the service, you reflect, and you would say, I am so glad I'm not in that situation. I'm so thankful that I'm not in that situation, which is a totally wrong orientation to this work. It is that I may be in a situation of privilege, but how do I use that to move this change and do this in solidarity with community? And so I think that that's where the reflection to action takes place in the way that we embody the work, the way we develop our courses, the opportunities for students, and also the way that we see our community partners. If we just see these community partners as spaces where we send students to do work and pat themselves on the back, then we shouldn't be doing this work. This is not what this work is about. Yeah.
2 comments and then just an offer of a way forward.
Yeah.
So the first one is around the absence of national guidelines for community engagement in South Africa. So I might be simplifying it, but community engagement is an unfunded mandate. Now, until it's funded, I don't think there's going to be a push to get national guidelines from the authorities in this country. So in the absence of that, I think for me, this is looking like a great way forward. The second thing is, when you spoke about the institutional self-study, it dawned on me that we need to be careful to drive it out of our units. We need to get buy-in from the Vice Chancellor, the top structure from the beginning, so that it can be a genuinely institutional thing. And then the third idea is that if anyone's interested, I'm happy just to administer and get that group together for the first time, and then we can choose who wants to lead it and how we want to move forward. I'd be happy to just convene that first meeting.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So in terms of the institutional buy-in and support at the Vice Chancellor, yes, absolutely. That's one of the things that's a requirement of the application. Is like the President or Chancellor needs to know that you're doing this and give support to this in order to move it forward. So that is key, because we know that without that institutional support, the work on the ground is not going to happen, and the movement from other departments that are not necessarily connected to yours won't happen. So that's a definite piece of it. You know, the other piece is I'll be heading up to Joburg, and tomorrow I have a meeting with University of South Africa. Already had a conversation with them. We're continuing the conversation around the Carnegie classification. And there seems to be some interest, excitement, you know, so, you know, we'll see. So I'll communicate back with you in terms of where those conversations go. And I just want to say that we're here because there was interest expressed in this. Like, I'm not going around the globe and saying, hey, why don't you do the Carnegie, right? Only if a country expresses interest do we begin a conversation with it, and we really want to do this in the space of partnership of sort of global learning and connection around this work that I think has been part of this work since the beginning, and continuing that through the Carnegie Elective Classification, regardless of the Carnegie name that's on there, that, you know, can be problematic. So, but thank you all so much. I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much, Marisol.